So this is the one where a woman seems to get massacred by zombies in what feels like Scotland, and then later in the movie she turns up in London right as rain with barely a bite mark on it. I still to this day don't fully get that, but let's get into the movie anyway. Hi guys, so in 2007 there was a sequel to 28 Days Later entitled 28 Weeks Later. This one would not be directed by Danny Boyle, although he was still associated with the project either as a writer or a creative consultant. I'm not entirely sure which. Alex Garland, who co-wrote the first film, he was back to help out a little bit with this as well. But in the director's chair we get a guy I've never really heard of actually. He's got a Spanish sounding name, it's not going to come to me. But I did look at his filmography earlier, and he's not got that much work on there, really. A few things, but not much. So I kind of wondered how he got this gig in the first place, actually, given that it is quite a high-profile horror film, as horror films go. And given that this film turned out pretty damn good, I kind of wonder why he didn't go on to get more things afterwards. This film has an absolutely amazing cast. This isn't one of those straight-to-video sequels that's just trying to quickly make a quick buck on the back of the first one and then move on. This is an attempt at a really serious sequel, and to my mind's eye, it's had at least as much money pumped into it as the first film, possibly even more. Just look at the names in the cast list, if you will. We've got Robert Carlyle. We've got Jeremy Renner playing what looks like an early version of Hawkeye. When you see him high up in the buildings in London in this with his sniper rifle, it really does sort of remind you of when he's high up in the tent in the middle of the Nevada desert in Thor from 2011, you know, with his bow and arrow. We've also got a bunch of names in here who I'd completely forgotten were in this, such as Idris Elba. He plays a kind of army colonel. You see him now and again pacing back and forth in the command centre, and then he completely disappears from the story about halfway through. Idris Elba did quite a lot of mediocre roles for him, at least earlier on in his career. You know, the year after this, he did the really atrocious Prom Night sequel, and then coincidentally, he was also in the 2011 Thor film, but not playing a particularly great role. He played some kind of gatekeeper in Thor's homeworld. I think if Idris Elba had joined Marvel in 2021 with all of his fame by that point, he would have got a much better role than that gatekeeper role that he got in 2011. But anyway, moving swiftly on. We've also got Catherine McCormack in this film playing the woman I was briefly talking about in the prologue. I mainly remember her from playing that really hot girl in Braveheart who dies really on and gives Mel Gibson his motivation. That broke my heart as a teenager, that death, never mind Mel Gibson's. And finally, I'm going to mention, we've also got Rose Byrne. I'd totally forgotten she was in this film, which surprises me because I really like her as an actress. I like her in Sunshine, the Insidious films. So I was delighted to see her in this the other night, and that had completely escaped my memory somehow. So yeah, we've got a great cast, but we've got none of the original characters or actors coming back. I don't really know why. Some people will like that approach, some people will not. Possibly Cillian Murphy had moved on to other things. He did Batman Begins in 2006. Maybe he just didn't want to do another zombie film like this. I don't know about Naomi Harris. I guess the third part of the equation there, Frank's daughter from the first film, I forget the character's name. She could have been a potential problem in terms of bringing the original set of characters back, because she looked about 12 or 13 in the original film. By the time this one was made, she would have been like getting on an adult. So it could have been a whole Newt Alien 3 sort of dilemma for the writers, producers. You know, how would you have brought this girl back looking like 4 or 5 years older when we're only meant to be going 28 weeks further down the line? So when I try and picture what happened to these characters who we last saw shacking up, presumably in the Lake District up north in England, I see two possibilities. Firstly, either they are still there, living in the north of England, while 28 weeks later is happening down south, or maybe the American military picked them up and gave them the option. Do you want to be part of the rebirth in London, or do you want to get a free ticket to America and you can just get the hell out of Dodge? I suspect they maybe went for the second option, because we certainly don't see them in London. And creatively, it would have been a little bit odd if they'd have come back for this film but just been plonked back in London. I mean, we spent a lot of time watching them bravely escape London in the first film, and it would be weird to just see them picked up in a jet and dumped back in London, and there you go, try and escape London all over again. That would be kind of weird. So personally, I don't mind the fact that they've gone for a different set of characters, different set of actors, especially when those actors are such of a high caliber. So the story for this sees the American military come in and attempt to help us poor Brits rebuild our society. And I noticed a little bit of a plot hole here in regards to the first movie, because one of the characters in that first film, I'm sure they said something along the lines of that they'd heard a report that the outbreak had reached Paris, Berlin, other cities and what have you. But in this movie, it's sort of implied that the outbreak was contained to the United Kingdom. So there's a little bit of an inconsistency there. Though I guess we could also say that whoever that character was in the first movie who said that, maybe they'd misheard the report or misseen the report, misinterpreted whatever it was that they'd heard, whatever. So the Americans and the Brits, what they're doing at the start of this film is they're setting up like an enclosed space in the middle of London. And the idea is that they're going to have lots of people live in this area, make it really nice and stuff, and they're going to slowly build outwards again, because all the infected have apparently died of starvation between the first film and the second film. So how does the infection start up again, you may ask? Well, I will tell you. So that woman I was referring to in the prologue, she gets torn to pieces, seemingly, in some countryside retreat. But then she turns up later in the movie in London with like one bite on her, and then she's brought back into the new community, and the infection spreads from there. No matter how many times I try and picture this woman's journey from the countryside to London, though, it never quite works for me, because this woman, basically, she gets infected, but she can't fully turn into a zombie. She's got like funny globules in her eyes, and this is when she's found. She's got these weird red blotches in her eyes, and she can't articulate words properly anymore. So it's like she's half turned, but she's not fully gotten there yet. But the fact that she still looks somewhat human is what allows her to get across the perimeter into the community. Rose Byrne is suspicious. Somebody of the quality of Rose Byrne, I would absolutely expect her to have suspicions. Idris Elba does not have any suspicions because he just wasn't cool at this point of his career, but this woman gets into the community nevertheless. Like I said, though, I do have problems with how she got to London in the first place, because clearly in the prologue, even though we don't see the gory details of it, she's clearly ripped away from the window of her cottage, and presumably there were like a few of them diving on top of her. Yet later on, she's got like one bite mark on her. I think the idea is that she's got some sort of genetic anomaly within her, which means she's not, I don't know, I guess the zombies would have been not quite happy about eating her for some reason, so they let her go ultimately. But it just doesn't work when I picture it in my head. So you're telling me that when she was pounced upon by the window, one of them bit her arm and then said, "Oh, whoa, hang on, lads. I'm detecting a weird genetic anomaly in this woman, which doesn't make her very tasty, very palatable. I think we should leave this one alone and go and finish off the rest of the housemates instead." I don't think that happened. I think what should have happened really is that all these zombies would have pounced on this woman, torn her to shreds, and then maybe 15, 20 minutes later, when they're digesting their dinner, they would think, "Oh, that didn't go down well. There's something not quite right about that woman's blood." But by that point, she'd be an absolute wreck, you know what I mean? She'd be like all skin and bone, and she'd be all torn up. So to have her turn up in London with just one bite mark on her, it's a bit hard to swallow, no pun intended, but you've just got to go with it, I suppose. So she ends up strapped to a bed in the medical ward of the new community, and Robert Carlyle turns up and stupidly decides to kiss her. If it was me, there's no way in the world I'd be kissing my wife if she was in that situation. When I've just lived through a zombie apocalypse and my wife, it turns up, she's strapped to a bed, I've no idea where she's been, she's got red blotches in her eyes, she's lost the ability to speak, I think I would be smelling a rat, and yeah, I wouldn't be kissing her. It's not like one little peck on the lips is going to take care of all that pent-up sexual frustration you've probably been building up over the last few weeks. So Bit of a silly move from Mr. Carlyle, but that is what it is that gets the virus into the population of the community. It goes through Robert Carlyle's character and then eventually into everybody else, and we have this madcap zombie film all of a sudden where everybody's trying to get out of London. Going back to that prologue where the character played by Catherine McCormack originally comes from, in my opinion, it is it is the best opening to a zombie film I've ever seen. Change my mind on that. It's just phenomenal. The adrenaline that courses through you when you're watching it. You see this situation where all these characters, they're introduced and then all hell breaks loose. Zombies get into the house, and next thing we've got Robert Carlyle sprinting across the fields. We get some amazing camera shots where the cameras are just trailing him as he's running, and all these zombies are going after him. And then Robert Carlyle, you sort of see a shot where he's looking straight ahead, and just past him, all these zombies come over the fields in the background. There's more of them. It's shot in such an amazing way. You can totally picture what's going on from the camera angles. It's just absolutely fantastic. I presume that if all Robert Carlyle had to run towards were more empty fields, then eventually he would have been caught because he would have run out of breath. And that would have been a good way to end the scene, actually. It would have shown just how dangerous these particular types of zombies are, that you maybe can't just outrun them because maybe you will run out of breath faster than them. But it doesn't finish like that. Robert Carlyle's character ends up on a boat and it's spinning around and it's really exciting. And the first time I watched this, I wasn't sure if he was going to live through this or whether we were going to get a kind of Drew Barrymore type death, and then other characters would take over for the rest of the movie. So yeah, apart from the logic of that character, that woman in the house and what happens to her, the rest of the scene is just absolutely amazing. This film just gets off to such a flying start, and we get a good dilemma in this scene as well, because Robert Carlyle's character, he sort of turns down the chance to save his wife. Instead, he just chooses to at least save himself, probably thinking that if he tries to save his wife, then they'll both die. But I can imagine that this is something that people would have chatted about when they were coming out of the cinema when this was released, because I think different people will have different opinions, won't they? Some people will think, well, he should have taken the noble cause, put himself in front of his wife, and even if it would have meant his own death, and who knows, maybe his wife would have got away. Other people will say, well, if he'd have tried to save her, then they both would have died. This was absolutely the most common sense thing to do. Now, if you're going to wonder how I would have reacted in that situation, I'm not going to tell you, because let's face it, we can all be Monday morning quarterbacks, as American airport cops are fond of saying. So I'm not going to give my answer to the dilemma. I can sort of see it both ways, but it's a fantastic little bit of character development that then Robert Carlyle has to take forward into the rest of his scenes. He gets a lot of meaty stuff to chew on here, even if he's not actually present for the vast majority of the film. One thing I realised on this rewatch that I didn't notice the first few times I watched the movie in the past is the presence of this little kid in the opener. He turns up, he's let into the house, and he's gobbling this food because he's clearly been on the run for a while. But when I used to watch the film, I completely forgot that he was there. But because I'm now a dad and I've got kids of my own, I think I was more aware this time around that this kid presumably just gets completely devoured in this cottage, and it kind of made me feel a little bit sad when I was watching it. Also in the prologue, we get the reuse of the 28 Days theme that was used so brilliantly at the end of the first movie. We get it back here, and it's actually used more in this second film than the first film, but to really good effect. It's good that they didn't just use it again at the end of the second film, like the end of the first one. This time we get it at the start, we get it in the middle, and it's always extremely effective when it's used, with the possible exception this time around of the very finale of the movie. We get a third use of the music, and I think that's possibly the only time where maybe it was one time too many. When I think of the helicopter going over the White Cliffs of Dover and we're getting towards the conclusion, I think maybe after everything we've just gone through, I think we needed something a bit more reflective at that point. But still, what a fantastic asset to this group of films that piece of music has been. It's great. So similar to the first film, we get a human threat in this. First time around, there was like a little community of soldiers, and initially they did a good job of starting to create a new society. They'd set up a perimeter around this mansion, and they decided who was doing what. They had a leader, a cook, and blah, blah. And it was all going well, but ultimately everything was ruined by the fact that man just apparently cannot go without sex. So these two women came along, and instead of let relationships develop naturally, they came up with this thing where the two women would just be passed around all the soldiers like sex toys, and apparently that would keep everybody happy. I guess the leader was probably afraid that if he allowed relationships to just happen naturally, then that would still mean that 6 or 7 of the men would be without girlfriends, and that would lead to jealousy and resentment and possibly murder. But you know what? Too bad, because what he came up with in that film as an alternative was completely evil and inappropriate, and it just led to the downfall of that community. So to sum up, basically, it was all ruined by sex. Man's inability to control his lust was the downfall of that whole group. This time around, we again get soldiers who are problematic for our lead characters, but it's nothing to do with sex this time around. This time it's more to do with the military machine and the ineffectiveness of that. I mean, there's no question of Idris Elba's colonel starting to pass women around in this. This is a proper military structure, you know, but that has its own problems, because when things go to hell in this film, when the infected and humans start running all over the place, it's like the soldiers spend about 2 minutes trying to sort it out, and then it's like, oh, this is just too much hassle. You know what? Just kill them all. We'll start the society again in a few weeks. We'll try again in a while. But yeah, this is not going to work. So the problem in this film is that a lot of the soldiers underneath the command, they're just completely unwilling to ignore orders, even if those orders are completely stupid. There's one soldier who ignores them, basically Jeremy Renner's character. The rest of them are quite happy to just start killing people with their sniper rifles and flamethrowers and what have you. So that is a massive threat in this movie, alongside the infected. Something else in this that's carried over from the first film is this propensity for showing open area shots of London. Now, it would have been very easy for the second film not to do that. You know, the second film could easily have said, well, that's the first film's thing. We're not going to just copy what we've already done. We're going to go our own way. Because, you know, those shots that the first film did, that they weren't easy to get. But 28 Weeks Later is a film which is seemingly determined to not let its predecessor outdo it in any shape or form. So, yeah, we get more shots of open London, lots of empty streets and things, difficult scenes to film. We get that all over again. And I actually think that this time around they're even better than they were in the first film for a couple of reasons. Firstly, they're not, these shots this time, they're not as grainy and blurry as they were in the first film. I watched both of these films on DVD to prepare for these reviews, and second time around I wasn't even thinking about the picture quality really, I just watched the movie. But first time around I was literally pausing the movie at times to go on the internet and research why the film didn't look that great, but no such worries this time around. Also, there are quite a few cleverly edited sequences this time around when it comes to those open shots of London. So there's this one where the characters are just starting to walk out of London the night after the carnage, and this is interspersed with shots of the infected running out of the community area. So I started to think to myself, okay, so given that the infected are running and the main characters, the human characters are walking, does that mean that the infected are going to catch up to the humans at any point, any time now? That didn't happen. I guess the infected must have been running out of London in a slightly different direction, but the possibility was still there. So I felt this tension inside when I was watching it. I'm not sure if the director had a hand in how that scene was shown on screen, or whether it's just some ingenious idea in the editing room, but it works out really well. Also, there's a scene in this earlier on in the movie where the two siblings find a scooter and just start driving through London. Just to divert for a second, it's Imogen Poots who plays the older sister. I guess she's about 14, 15 in this. I didn't talk about Imogen Poots earlier when I was talking about the cast at large, but this is a woman who went on to have a pretty good career after this film, and still is having a good career. She's only in her 30s, I guess. But I've not seen any of her other work after this, apart from 2019's Black Christmas, where she was hopelessly miscast in the lead role. Like, she was way past 30 at that point, I think, maybe early to mid-30s, but she didn't look anywhere near the college age that she was meant to be. That whole film is absolute shite anyway. It wouldn't have mattered who the hell was in the lead role, but she fares much better with this. She's very well cast in this role. She does a hell of a good job. you know, given the fact we've got all these famous names around her, I think she really kind of sets a stall out as an actress to be taken seriously. But going back to this scene with the siblings driving through London on the scooter, it's better for me than any of the shots of Jim walking through London in the original, because in that film, Jim was confused. He didn't know what was going on. He didn't know what the hell was happening around him. But in this situation with the scooter, these two characters know full well what's going on. They know that there's no infected at this point in the movie, so they can just enjoy this trip around London on the scooter. And I'm sure I'm not the only person who at some point in their life has had a fantasy about waking up one day and the population's gone and you can just drive around in a car at 1,000,000 miles an hour knowing that no one's going to bump into you. I'm not even a car lover, and I've had that fantasy in my life, so I can damn well guarantee that other people have had the fantasy too. But these two characters are living that dream for like 20, 30 minutes. They're just driving around, feeling free, letting the wind bounce off them. This scooter's going all over the place, and we get gorgeous shots of London again. Just absolutely fantastic. If I went through all the really great scenes in this film, I'd be here a hell of a long time. Overall, I think this movie is a smidgen better than the first one. I'm not sure, actually, if I did a poll, which would win out of the two films. Maybe the first one would win, you know, unless a second film is really obviously better than a first one. The original will often win in a poll because people just tend to prefer the original a lot of the time. But on this occasion, it's a tight contest, but I'm just going for the second one. So I'll quickly show you the version of the film that I've got for this. Here is my DVD copy of 28 Weeks Later. I really like the cover art for this. The older sister protecting her brother in a sea of dead bodies. Much better, I think, than the cover art of 28 Days Later, which was mostly just this red thing with a symbol on it. Lots of great features on this. There's a making of doc, an optional commentary, and deleted scenes, and one or two other minor things. It's a good little selection that you get on this disc, and I would absolutely be up for upgrading this potentially to an even better version of the film, but I would be wary if they bring out a Blu-ray for this, or if there already is a Blu-ray, because I know that with 28 Days Later, the Blu-ray did nothing to change what was already on the DVD. It was basically the same film, apparently, just transferred to a Blu-ray disc. So do be wary. But certainly, if there was ever a 4K of this, I would love to see that. Right, let's get to the bag of terror and find out what sort of score I'm going to give this movie. So, we've got 1, 2, 3... 4, struggling to carry them, 4.5 bloody axes out of 5. That is the exact same score I gave 28 Days Later, but despite that, I still think this is a marginally better film. It's not that far off masterpiece status, just a few issues of logic, I guess, throughout the film. Just keep it away from that potential eventuality, but 4.5 out of 5 is still superb. I love these two films. I think they're absolutely amazing. So there we have it. Thank you for joining me. I'll be back very soon with another video. My next review is intended to be The Warriors from 1979. Can you dig it? I know I can. Until next time, cheerio, bye-bye.